And he said, oh, I definitely prefer LSD. And this is a Swiss chemist, Central European intellectual. And I said, why do you prefer LSD? And he said, the psilocybin is too animate. And I said, you mean there's somebody in there? And he said, yes. He found the LSD more psychoanalytic, more reassuring, more drug-like, I would say. I mean, LSD does what you think a psychedelic would do if you've never taken one. Psilocybin, on the other hand, can surprise you. See, the thing about LSD that makes it unique as a commodity, not as a drug, but as a commodity, is that it takes so little to get you off. 2,000 doses in a gram. Very, very, very few drugs are active in that range. The great deal has to do with expectation, setting, and how you are led into it. So it's good to have the scientific, pharmacological, reductionist approach, but you have to sort of hold it simultaneously with the understanding that in the realm of mind, mind leads. One of the things that I've grappled with is, when you get out on one of these things and it's very, very shaky, or you're having a hard time, you can always, if you're well educated in these things, go back to the chemical data and say, well, I only took 25 milligrams of psilocybin. Nobody has ever died from this. It's impossible to die from this, so forth and so on. But the deeper truth is, there's this horrifying quote from Jung, the psyche has 1,000 ways to terminate a life that has become meaningless. You're responsible if you do this. This is happening because a decision is being made in your structure. So it's fine to have the pharmacological data, but you also really have to respect these things. See, what I like about DMT especially, but all these alkaloids, is in a certain very important sense, they do not affect my mind. They affect my visual pathway, they affect my perception, they affect my somatic self-image, but the part of me that is watching is not ever interrupted. If it destroys the recording apparatus of the experience, then you're not taking a lot out of it. People have a lot of trouble saying much about many of these things. I think that's a learned skill, narrative ability to keep your wits about you in those places and to try and bring back some kind of coherent metaphor. It's very difficult because you're essentially trying to download a higher dimension into not only three-dimensional space, but three-dimensional space linguistically defined by American culture and historicity and so forth and so on. But to the degree that you can slowly move the benchmarks out, that's where we learn something, It's as important to tell your trip as it is to have the trip. A little psychedelic makes everything fascinating and inviting and enfolding. A lot brings on deeper insights. It's very individual. And also these things are steerable. You can keep it at the surface if you want, or you can take it to depth. It seems to know what your limits are, and it's willing to let you test those limits. But there's no doubt that there are things not only that no one has ever looked upon, but that no one can ever look upon because. As I'm sure you know, the brain has what's called a fight and flight response. In many situations, the brain will just offer up these two choices, fight or flight. Actually, neither of these is the correct response. The correct response is to deep breathe, oxygenate your blood, and wait for the thing to pass by. Whatever works for you. I mean, I pray going into it, and I say to it, please be kind. I am completely at your mercy. I always have cannabis ready. It's the rudder of the boat, basically. I always have cannabis ready, and then deep breathing, and more importantly, song. Usually, these states, which you think of as psychedelic hells, if you have sufficient presence of mind to analyze them, or if somebody's observing you, what's happening is that your breath is failing, shallow breathing. And some people don't have presence of mind enough to deep breathe, even if you smack them around and tell them to deep breathe. So what you say to them is sing, sing. And this establishes oxygen moving through the body, and it also establishes a task which focuses people, and they quickly discover that it's interesting. The key when you're having a bad trip is to make your mind wander from the bummer. And an interesting thing to know about fear, maybe the most important thing to know about fear, is that it's a reaction in your body which has a very short-term chemical foundation. No one can be petrified with terror longer than 5 minutes. It just gives way to something else. I like to quote, the fear comes. It comes like a wind, and you must just allow it to blow through you. So the way I deal with fear is I don't move, and I sing. And inevitably, I can march my way out of most states of discomfort. There are different kinds of bummers. There is discovery of something in your own past, traumatic, that you lost. That's rare, but devastating. There's also fear of madness. It's horrifying to think that some of these places you pass through for a few moments might persist for hours, days, weeks. In my experience, it's very, very rare. And people who have terrible difficulties with psychedelics usually show all the signs of being unstable or marginal before they go into it. It isn't a case of everybody has to prove themselves. It's more like this is a calling. It's for edge runners. And in human society, the way it's worked is to deputize people. Call them shamans, seers, visionaries, DMT test pilots. And, you know, a test pilot is a good metaphor. I mean, a test pilot is cool. A test pilot can eject at 3 times the speed of sound as part of a day's work. The wonderful thing about the human psyche and the human brain is its thirst for equilibrium, you know, and its many modes and methods for returning you to equilibrium. Nobody has ever nailed down what, if any, the connection of this stuff is to severe mental illness. People thought, well, DMT is so weird, surely schizophrenics must have more of it than normal people. They have less of it than normal people. People can go from birth to the grave and never have a psychedelic experience. But it is an avoidable dimension in life. And some people have one psychedelic experience, and that is fine. They now know that the world has edges, and they stay far away from those edges from thence forward. People say, you know, it's not for everybody. It certainly isn't. It's important to be in good physical shape. It's important to be in good mental shape. And it's also important to take yourself lightly enough that if it slams you, you can climb back on your board without too much self-doubt. Because it will. But a curious thing about it is there is something like beginner's luck. I have heard people say they've never had a bad trip on mushrooms. Well, congratulations. It's a very, very delicate balance. And you learn as much from the deep, hard trips, if not more,